Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you provide and really dig in to pull out the key insights efficiently.
Exactly. It's about getting you well-informed, quickly, without you feeling buried in information.
And today we're diving into urban design and planning. We've got a really interesting PDFs someone shared with us.
That's right. And it's not just about, where we put buildings. It digs into the structure, the experience of our cities, and ultimately their sustainability.
So our mission here is to get a handle on the big debates, the potential solutions in urban development today, all based on this source.
Yeah, and the study looks closely at neo-traditional urbanism, sort of as a response to problems with more modern planning approaches.
And we'll be covering quite a bit from this document to get the full picture.
We will. We're looking at the history of urban design ideas, a case study of Vora in Portugal,
Oh, interesting.
and also surveys. What experts think, what the public thinks about urban design. Should be fascinating.
Definitely. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What is urban design, fundamentally, and what's the main problem this source says it's trying to fix?
Well, the EU expert group gives a definition. It's about the physical design, the planning of the built environment,
Right.
buildings, spaces, infrastructure,
Okay.
and how that relates to the natural environment around it, plus the concepts, the models used to guide how buildings relate to each other.
But it's more than just technical planning, right? The study mentions something else.
Yes, exactly. It stresses the normative aspect. The idea that it's about, and this is a quote, making better places for people than would otherwise be produced.
Better places.
Huh.
Okay, so what makes places not so better, according to this? What's the core issue here?
The document points to planners and policymakers struggling with, well, a real mess sometimes.
Mm.
Disjointed land uses, infrastructure stretched thin, investments all over the place.
Leads to problems we all know.
Right. Traffic jams, obviously. But also deeper things like social isolation, just a poor, crowded urban environment overall. Think about, endless sprawl where you have to drive everywhere.
Yeah, that feeling of disconnectedness. Not really a community.
Exactly. And the study argues for more sustainable patterns, like new urbanism specifically, as a way to sort of reclaim urban life.
Okay, new urbanism. But this didn't just appear out of nowhere. There's a backstory, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The study gives great context. It talks about the shift away from the functional city idea of modern urbanism.
Why the shift?
Because, well, it often just didn't create very livable, vibrant places, so you get these postmodernist challenges cropping up. Though the source does say there's debate on whether it was a clean break or more gradual.
And during this rethinking phase, some European movements emerged, like the neo-rationalists.
People like Leon Krier in Europe, they argued for going back to historical foundations, looking at typologies, basic building forms, successful urban spaces.
Like streets and squares.
Exactly. And urban morphology, the city's layout, its structure. Learning from history to, rebuild streets, squares, neighborhoods properly. Krier was apparently quite influential on North American new urbanism later on.
So looking back to move forward, in a sense, and in Britain there was the townscape movement. What was their angle?
They're really focused on the relationship between buildings. Not just the buildings themselves, but how they were arranged, how they worked together to create a sense of place, inspired by people like Sit and Unwin.
Right, not just isolated objects, but the whole scene.
Precisely, the overall harmony and character.
That makes sense. The source also brings up Kevin Lynch. Imageability. That sounds key to how we actually experience a city.
It really is. Lynch talked about how we form a mental map, a strong visual image, using paths, edges, districts, nodes, landmarks.
The elements that make a city legible.
Exactly. And his work, plus Appleyard's on Livable Streets, really highlighted perception, how we see and use the urban environment, walking or driving. Appleyard stressed that streets, especially residential ones, aren't just for cars. They're for people living there, too.
Right. Streets as places, not just traffic corridors. And Christopher Alexander's pattern language, that sounds very structured.
It is very detailed. Based on observing medieval cities, he came up with 253 interconnect patterns.
253. Wow.
Yeah, applicable at all scales, from a whole region down to like a window detail. The idea is these patterns capture timeless qualities of good design, and they need to work together. It's very holistic.
Okay, so we have these critiques, these different ideas percolating. How did this all come together in the U.S. as neo-traditional design?
Well, the source says in the 1980s, these ideas, Krier, Alexander, even earlier Garden City concepts from Howard started merging in the U.S. You had Peter Calthorpe's pedestrian pocket,
Which focused on...
walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. That evolved into transit-oriented development, TOD, basically building those walkable places around transit hubs, linking land use and transport.
Got it. And the other big piece was Duany and Pleter-Zayberk.
Exactly. Andres Duany and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, they developed the traditional neighborhood development model, TND.
Similar ideas.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Compact, mixed-use, interconnected streets, like older towns. And TND, along with TOD, kind of flowed into this bigger movement we now call New Urbanism. The Congress for the New Urbanism, CNU, formed in the early 90s. That was a key moment.
So new urbanism is this synthesis, a direct challenge to sort of standard suburban sprawl. What are its core principles, according to this source?
Okay, the study lays out several key ones, drawing on Katz and Frug. First up, multi-use environments. Moving away from strict zoning that separates everything. Instead, integrated shops, workplaces, homes, schools, parks, public buildings, all in the same neighborhood. Diverse housing types, too.
So you don't have to drive for miles for everything.
That's the goal. Walkable or bikeable access to daily needs.
Makes sense. What's next?
Pedestrian-friendly design. This is huge. Prioritizing people on foot over cars.
How?
Interconnected streets and sidewalks. Street designs that naturally slow down traffic. Making walking pleasant trees, benches, parked cars, buffering the sidewalk. Creating places people actually want to walk.
A big shift from car-first planning. What else?
Public transportation. New urbanists see transit and walking as working together. Good transit needs walkable access to stops. And walking is better in vibrant mixed-use areas, not just parking lots.
So it's about balance, more options than just the car.
Exactly. Better balance.
And it's not just about movement, right? There's a community aspect.
Absolutely. Public space is the focal point.
Yeah.
Streets, squares, parks, public buildings. They're seen as vital gathering places, essential for community life, social interaction. Think traditional town squares.
Right, the heart of the community. And the last principle.
Architecture and planning codes that actually support all this. Codes that encourage mixed use, walkable streets, good public spaces, instead of, mandating sprawl.
So changing the rules of the game.
Pretty much. And the source notes, new urbanism is gaining ground. Seen as a real alternative, aligning with European ideas about urban regeneration, too.
It sounds like a really appealing vision for communities, but it's not without its critics or challenges, is it? The study mentions opposing views.
That's right. He talks about the postmodern fragmented city view. Thinkers like Deere and Garreau.
And their argument is?
Basically that sprawl and edge cities, those hubs outside downtowns, are just the natural result of current economic and social forces. Kind of inevitable. The periphery is the future, they argue.
But the source questions that.
Yeah, it points out the limitations, the sustainability issues with that car-dependent model.
And there's pushback from within architecture, too. Rem Koolhaas.
Yes. Koolhaas takes a very different tack. He argues market forces are so dominant, design can't really control outcomes. The fragmented city just is. It reflects these powerful forces.
Bit fatalistic.
The study critiques it as maybe too accepting of fragmentation, possibly even demagogic in dismissing efforts to design better places. It really poses the question, do we just accept market outcomes, or do we try to steer towards better social and environmental goals?
A fundamental tension there. Okay, so the study then explores the normative qualities of urban design from that neo-traditional angle. What does that involve?
This is where it really digs into the values. What neo-traditionalism thinks makes good urban design, it uses 4 dimensions: functional, social, morphological, and temporal or evolutionary.
Let's take those one by one. Functional.
Functionally, it's all about mixed land uses, absolutely essential for vibrant, sustainable places. It critiques monofunctional zoning, separating everything, and the car dependency that follows.
Even if market forces push that way.
Right. The evidence points to benefits from mixing uses. So the ideal includes connected public spaces, homes within walking distance of shops and transit, public buildings on squares, enough density to support local life. Designing for convenience, walkability.
Okay, and the social dimension.
That's about the link between physical space and social activity. Public space, public life. Design can't make people interact, but it can definitely enable or inhibit it.
How so?
Public spaces act as forums for meeting, learning, those third places, cafes, local shops, community hubs, very different from private controlled suburban spaces.
So the principles here are?
Integrating diverse people socioeconomically, age-wise. Providing good, accessible public spaces for socializing, resting, opportunities for just, people watching. building community.
Designing for interaction, not just efficiency. Third is morphological. That sounds like the physical shape.
Exactly. The form, the structure. It contrasts the traditional city, where buildings define the public space.
Like walls of a street or square.
Right. Versus the modernist city, where buildings are often like objects sitting in undefined open space. There's renewed interest in traditional patterns. Sit, unwin, creer.
And the principles.
Public space defined by building facades. Good relationship between building height and street width. Human scale. Visual interest. Variety, not monotony. And integrating buildings into the larger urban fabric. Coherence.
Thinking in 3D, not just footprints on a map. And the last one, temporal or evolutionary.
This focuses on incremental change. Robust buildings that last, that can adapt over time, as opposed to, tearing everything down for massive redevelopment projects.
Building for the long haul.
Exactly. Allowing cities to evolve more organically, keep their character and history, adaptability.
Right. Those 4 dimensions, functional, social, morphological, temporal, give a really clear picture of the neo-traditional ideal. Now, the case study, Evora, Portugal. Why Evora?
It's a great example because it has this incredibly well-preserved historic core, really high quality, but it's also facing major suburban growth issues, like lots of European cities. So you get this contrast, successful traditional center versus the challenges of modern expansion.
A living laboratory almost. What did they find in Evora?
Well, the historic center is fantastic, pedestrian-friendly, a real social and economic hub. But paradoxically, it's losing residents to the suburbs.
And the suburbs.
They identified 4 main types. An older planned neighborhood, 50s, 60s Garden City style. Some areas of less planned, more informal growth from the 60s, 70s boom. Then neighborhoods planned under an 80s zoning plan. And finally, recent private, often gated condos, all with different physical characteristics.
And the big takeaway from comparing the center and the suburbs.
It's this core contradiction. The high-quality center is emptying out, while the often lower-quality suburbs are filling up. It really highlights the challenge. How do you get those traditional qualities into new developments and make the center appealing to live in again?
A tough nut to crack. The study also looked at Evora's planning and development control systems. What were the issues there?
They found quite a few problems through interviews. 8 key challenges, actually.
Yeah.
Structural issues in the administration departments not coordinating, resource problems. A lack of a clear, proactive public vision planning was more reactive. Development happening piecemeal through small subdivisions, not big comprehensive plans.
Bureaucracy getting in the way.
Definitely. Lengthy approval processes for proper urban design plans. Public participation was often minimal, just ticking a box.
No clear rules for good design.
That too. Lack of clear criteria, or good examples for design review, big gaps between what plans said and what actually got built, and just general resistance to implementing urban design plans properly.
Wow, that's a lot of hurdles. Makes it hard to implement any vision, let alone a neo-traditional one.
Exactly.
Okay, but they also tried to gauge public opinion with a visual preference survey, VPS. How did that work?
Is an online survey. They showed people images, different streets, parks, buildings, and asked them to rate how much they liked or disliked them.
Who took the survey?
Mostly people more educated than the Evora average. The study then analyzed which images got the highest and lowest scores in different categories.
And what came out? What did people prefer?
The results were striking. Very consistent preference for traditional patterns. For residential streets, people liked 2-3-story buildings, vertical windows, clear building widths, trees, parallel parking, streets with a clear endpoint terminated vistas.
And disliked.
Repetitive modern buildings, no landscaping, streets that just trailed off.
What about commercial streets?
Strong preference for mixed use, traditional downtown type areas. Pedestrian streets, connected buildings with character, nice paving, street furniture, shade. Traditional markets, low scores for car-focused suburban strips with big box stores and parking lots.
So a clear vote for walkability and traditional character again, offices and green spaces.
For offices, people preferred them in mixed-use city centers or pedestrian plazas, not highway sprawl or isolated modern office parks. For green spaces, all types were liked, but traditional public gardens, meadows with big trees, small local parks, and pocket parks with seating scored highest.
Golf courses.
They were rated lowest among green spaces, though still positive overall.
Okay. And public spaces, safety, activity.
For public spaces, again, traditional types 1, central plazas with seating and art, small squares with cafes, arcades, parks with gazebos, modern mall interiors and isolated modern buildings, Negative scores.
Safety.
Traditional police presence scored highest. Other surveillance, like private security cameras, were also positive. No surveillance was negative.
And activity levels.
Strong preference for places with life both day and night over places dead after 5 p.m.
Really interesting. Such clear patterns. Did the experts surveyed agree with the public?
Largely, yes. Pretty good alignment. Experts rated malls and golf courses a bit lower, maybe. But the big picture from the top-rated images was the same. People like the traditional European town feel. Mixed-use centers and closed public spaces, traditional architecture, walkable streets, public life.
And the lowest rated?
Monotonous modern housing, car-centric places, dead public spaces. The contrast is really stark.
So, visually at least, there seems to be consensus. How did the study synthesize these findings? What are the main conclusions?
The biggest one is just how strong and consistent that preference for traditional urban forms is among both experts and the public in Evora. The study argues that if we want sustainable cities people actually like, this neo-traditional approach needs to be the norm. It challenges modernism's outcomes, the car dependency, the lack of livability.
And new urbanism fits this.
Yes, its principles, walkability, mixed use, human scale seem to align really well with what people prefer, and they also tackle sustainability issues.
If people prefer this, why isn't it happening everywhere? The study identified obstacles to implementing new urbanism, right?
It did. 4 main types. 1, resistance from planning professionals, maybe trained in older, modernist ways. Resistance from the political and financial establishment. They might be reluctant to change from familiar, conventional development models.
3,
Outdated legislation, zoning codes, building rules, street standards that actually prevent traditional designs.
and 4,
A lack of real public participation, often seen as a hurdle, not a resource. So the public's preferences don't actually shape things.
those are significant barriers, systemic ones.
Yeah.
Did the study offer policy advice or recommendations to overcome them?
Yes, several key areas. First, create a vision. Use strategic urban design plans, PPs, with clear, context-specific guidelines. Maybe use techniques like transect planning.
Second.
Improve development control. Use those guidelines to review projects. Encourage early talks between developers and planners. Focus on context, environment, social impact. Prioritize public spaces and landscaping from the start. Use local materials. Maybe performance indicators like LED-ND.
Streamline the process, too.
Right. Make decision-making faster, more efficient. Ensure planning departments have the right staff and resources. Speed up approvals for good urban design plans.
So a more proactive, quality-focused planning system. What else?
Definitely improve public participation. Increase awareness. Protect planning from short-term politics. Use better engagement methods, workshops, charrettes, visual surveys like the VPS. Make information mandatory, like billboards showing proposed projects.
Get people involved meaningfully.
Exactly. And finally, education. Across the board.
Yeah.
In universities for future planners and architects. Continuing development for current practitioners. And educating the public, kids in schools, politicians, about why good urban design matters so much.
It sounds like a really comprehensive strategy, vision, rules, process, participation, education. Okay, to wrap up our deep dive, what's the single biggest takeaway here?
I think it's that the source makes a very strong case, based on the Evora study, that people, experts, and the public alike genuinely seem to prefer the principles of neo-traditional urbanism. It seems to offer a path to more sustainable, livable cities. But actually getting there means tackling some pretty big obstacles in how we currently do planning and development. Overcoming inertia, basically.
That's a powerful conclusion. And it leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. Given these clear preferences for more traditional human-scaled places that the study highlights, what do you think are the most crucial changes we need to make in how our own communities are planned and built to better match these desires for a more livable urban fabric?
Something to think about.
Definitely. We encourage you to look deeper into new urbanism, urban design history, and what's happening with planning right where you live. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.